Hi, I'm James, and today we're going to talk about SQL and PowerShell for the win. Let's get started. First, the obligatory who the heck am I? Well, I'm James Brundage. I'm ex-Microsoft full-time. I'm an ex-member of the PowerShell team, currently at Microsoft MVP in PowerShell/Azure. I'm a maker of many tools and toys, a bit of a jack of all trades, and a master of PowerShell. And occasionally am brought in as a DBA/ETL wizard. So hopefully that qualifies me to talk here. All right, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to start off with some SQL 101. It might be a bit of a refresher, but never hurts. And we're going to talk about some PowerShell 101. Might be a bit new to everybody, maybe not. Then we're going to talk about combining them together, SQL and PowerShell 201. Then we're going to go do a bit of a demo time, and then we're going to do a bit of a story time, and then we're going to talk about how SQL and PowerShell together give you wins. Ready? Let's go. Let's start off with a bit of SQL 101. Might be a bit refresher. Sorry if it is. But, TLA is first. SQL is the structured query language. It is quite old at this point. There has been some form of SQL for about 50 years. It comes in many flavors, often called variants. It is great for working with tables of data. It is very much a query language, and not to throw any shade at SQL, but many people are very aware, sometimes very painfully, it is not technically a full programming language. It has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. So let's talk about each of those. In the pros column, well, it's really quick to query. That's part of SQL's whole thing, query language. It's also very efficient in how it stores data. Because SQL has a limited number of data types, it is very good at storing them very compactly, basically regardless of what SQL variant you use. It's also implicitly stateful. In fact, you might be able to call a database a collection of states. And it is mostly server-side. While you have a few SQL variants that effectively work locally, the vast majority of SQL Server use you will have is against a server. Now, that's mostly good, but it does kind of bring up a few weaknesses as well. Because it has to be constrained, it has a finite list of types, and it has fairly limited validation. You don't want a validation to become too expensive if you're taxing the server. And it's not particularly easy to extend. It works with other languages, but it is not a very extensible syntax itself. It also has very limited string manipulation, and this can get painful in all sorts of ways. So let's talk a little bit about syntax. Again, sorry if this is review for everybody here at a SQL conference. SQL syntax is fairly simple. You've got a limited number of keywords and support for parameters. Keywords tend to be capitalized. Parameters have to start with an @ There are a few fundamental building blocks, plenty more keywords than this, but these are the ones that most people are going to run across. You've got create table, which creates tables, select selects rows, insert into inserts rows, update updates rows and table, delete deletes data, and execute run stored procedures, at least presuming your SQL variant supports stored procedures. I've got this nice little handy dandy reference slide for some of the basics. Again, this should be a review if you are at all a SQL person, but if you are just learning the language, this is a good cheat sheet. So that's covering our SQL base. Now, let's start to talk about PowerShell. Okay, so PowerShell 101. PowerShell is a shell of a scripting language. It's a bit younger, a bit cooler, about 18 years old at this point. It's been built into the box in Windows since Windows 7. It comes in two flavors. You've got PowerShell Core, which is cross-platform, and Windows PowerShell, which again has been built into the box since Windows 7 timeframe. So you definitely have PowerShell installed on your system, at least unless you're still running Windows XP, God help you. But you might not be that experienced in it yet, so we're hopefully going to ramp you up a little bit today. PowerShell is really great for working with objects, and it is very much a fully fledged programming language. In my biased opinion, it is the best .NET scripting language, partially because it has so many fun bells and whistles. And it also has its share of strengths and weaknesses. Possibly a few more strengths, but it definitely has areas that it is weak. So let's cover the strengths and weaknesses. Strengths column. Well, you can automate anything with PowerShell. And I do really mean anything. PowerShell is all about building bricks that you can kind of easily interconnect with each other, building little blocks that you can reuse. And that makes the whole PowerShell ecosystem available to you once you're able to tap into it at all. It's also got very flexible validation. I can say that a parameter has to be a specific type. Any .NET type will do. I can say that it has to match a regular expression or be in a set of values or be within a range or match any arbitrary validation script. It's very easily extensible. I can basically create types as much as I like and extend them to do any additional functionality I might need. It supports any .NET type. If you can load the assembly in PowerShell, you can use it. It also has incredibly flexible string manipulation, and it is mostly client-side. While it is possible to run PowerShell server-side, you are more likely to encounter it in the PowerShell terminal, in Windows Terminal, or in VS Code. It does have a couple of well-known weaknesses, though. One of them is that it is actually fairly slow to query. While you've got pretty much infinite flexibility for how you can query, the language itself is nowhere near as fast at querying as SQL. The other one is that it has some inefficient storage. While you can save any object in PowerShell, you're going to save that at generally a larger cost to disk and memory than you would if you were saving it to SQL. So hopefully you can already see how these two languages kind of complement each other a bit. Now let's talk syntax. This might be a little bit more complicated than SQL, but let's start. For one, there are thousands of commands. Usually they're in verb-noun format. They don't have to be, but that is the most common form of command you're going to run into in PowerShell. I'm going to actually teach you your 3 best commands in a second. The Trinity of discoverability: get-command, get-help, get-member. Show me what I can run, help me understand how to use it, and show me what an object can do. These commands are often joined via the object pipeline. A good example of this might be something like get-command, pipe to get-random, pipe to get-help. Get all of my commands, pick a random one, get help about it. There's also thousands of types. .NET Core and Windows PowerShell both have a considerable number of types built in, loaded whenever you're using the shell, and any assembly that you load in .NET can work in PowerShell just fine. It also has all the operators. It has them in a bit of a funky format, though. So you have them in -eq, -ne, -like, -match, in, as, etc. So it's just a little bit different in operator format than most languages, and that might take some getting used to. You can do very easy variable assignment. Just go ahead and set it to a value or to the output of a command. And you can very easily do string expansion, which is what we're doing here. We're expanding either a variable or a sub-expression. Variable can just be $variable name inside of double quotes, and sub-expression can be $parentheses, whatever expression of code. Now, as with SQL, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of a cheat sheet here. So we can go ahead and see that get command, pipe to get random, pipe to get help. We can show you how we reference a type. And we can go ahead and create an object with a static method. That's that : and new. We can go ahead and do simple comparisons. We can do match extraction. We can do string expansion. PowerShell is a very, very potent language. And again, a lot of its strengths complement a lot of SQL's weaknesses, and a lot of SQL's strengths complement a number of PowerShell weaknesses. So with that in mind, let's talk about using them together. Okay, so let's talk about SQL and PowerShell together. SQL has always supported .NET, It's supported for decades. Since .NET 1.0, most of the stuff that I'm going to show you has been part of the .NET framework. And PowerShell has also always supported SQL out of the box. PowerShell and SQL were launch partners way back in 2006 when PowerShell first came out. Loaded .NET types are all accessible with bracket type syntax. We can always omit the system namespace. So we can refer to something like a SQL connection with bracket data.SQL client.SQL connection. And you might also use a data adapter, that'd be bracket data.SQL client.SQL data adapter. Static methods are available with : all types will have a constructor, or most types will have a constructor. So you can do : new to see the constructors. And that makes SQL connections easy and working with SQL very, very simple in PowerShell. So let's take a quick look at a one-slide version of how simple. The first statement up here is just creating the SQL connection. And that is, again, just getting our type, using the static constructor, passing connection string to it, and great, we've got a connection. This is creating a data adapter and filling a query. We're going to go ahead and create the adapter, select star from information schema tables. I'm just going to go pull out data pool data, create a data set, fill the data set from the data adapter, and go output the first table. That's how easy it is to basically do raw SQL on PowerShell. It's very handy. Variables are also very easy and very flexible. So is discovering what a variable can do. We're going to come back to this again and again in the demo, but you just pipe it to get member. This will go ahead and get you back methods, properties, and events. And SQL connections have a number of useful methods that you might want to look at. My favorite, personally, is .getSchema, which will get available schemas. And you can also pass a schema name to it to get schema information. You can also call create command, which will create a SQL command. So to kind of recap for demo mode, PowerShell supports SQL out of the box, always has been. SQL client ships with PowerShell core. PowerShell extends SQL. Table columns are exposed as properties. Tables are automatically enumerated, and this will work with any variant of SQL. So if you have SQLite database, SQL Compact, MySQL, whatever, it'll work. Let's demo some of the ways that we can script a database. Ready? Let's go. Okay, let's do some demos. We're going to start off with the basics. Again, PowerShell supports SQL Server out of the box, always has, always will. Let's see how simple it is to work with those SQL objects in PowerShell. We're going to start off by creating a connection. My connection string is in the variable demo connection string. No, you cannot see it. That is the path towards getting hacked. Please don't leak your connection strings. Please be very careful with them and keep them safe. I can, however, look at the members of SQL connection safely. So I can do that live. And we're going to go ahead and take this live connection here and get member and see what it can do. We've got a few events up here. Then we've got all these various methods. Create command we're going to end up using a lot. Get schema is the one we're going to explore in a second. But all of these are quite potentially useful and interesting. We can also search in this list by one or more wildcards. For example, I just want to go ahead and get all the gets. And, I got get hash code, which comes with every object, and get lifetime service, which I don't have to really care about, and get type, which will just tell me a bit more of the SQL connection type here. But the ones that I'm interested in are get schema and its collection name overload. So let's go ahead and open our connection so we can get at our schemas. Cool. Now let's find out about our database. It's called get schema, and it'll return back, oh, hey, I've got these different types of collections you could go get more schema information about. For instance, procedures would have your stored procedures, tables will have tables, columns will have columns. You get the point. Let's go ahead and ask for more information about schema by saying get schema tables. and I should get back a list of tables in this database. Now let's go ahead and create a command, and let's look at its members. Again, there's quite a few things that I can do here, but I don't have to care about all of it. In fact, I am primarily interested in the command text, and I want you to know about two parts of this here: the execute non-reader, which is basically fire and forget the query, and execute reader, which will give me back a reader to, read over the results. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and change that command by setting its command text property. This is the long way to go ask for a set of table schemas. Now we're going to go ahead and execute that query, which will return a reader. Now the reader is going to give us back stuff one row at a time. This is very handy. There is another way we can run things, which I'll show later, that allows you to fill a whole data set at a time, but going row by row can sometimes be a little bit quicker and a little bit less impactful on memory. We can also assign the results of the loop to a variable in PowerShell, so we can just kind of go over while there are new reader results, taking each particular result that we get, creating a dictionary here to, hold the result row, and then walking over each column and getting the name of the column and the value of the column and putting it into this dictionary, and then turning the dictionary into a PS custom object, which just turns it into a regular everyday PowerShell object. And looking at the results, there we are. We actually have basically the same object coming back. This is a good, quick way to be able to run a query, and, the SQL Reader approach is quite handy to know. It's also what you would need to do if you wanted to do a bulk copy of the tables. But we're going to go update our table in a second. For now, let's just go ahead and close the reader and stop this particular demo. All right, next demo. Let's go ahead and try to get a little creative. Specifically, let's create a table, insert some rows, and read them back. We're going to do a little bit of light metaprogramming here, and we're going to do some things that SQL couldn't on its own. But right now, let's just go ahead and create a command. Pure SQL does not allow us to parameterize the table name or columns during create, but PowerShell does. So we're going to do that real quick. Let's go ahead and pick a random table name. This is a sub-expression that has test table, $, means this sub-expression here will run, and it'll run the command get random, which will just give us back a random number. So I've got a randomly named test table just like that. I want to go create a list of columns, and I can just create a list in PowerShell with the @ operator and include both of these items, basically just in direct SQL. And we can construct the SQL query to create the actual table. All we need to do with this is a little bit more string expansion here, and we create table, $table name, and then in parentheses, we create the columns, joining them by comma and a space. So that'll give me my create table command text, and we're going to go and run this. Congratulations, we got a table. Now let's insert a row or two. So create a new command for the insertion. We can reuse our table name and define a message parameter. We generally like to use SQL parameters if we can, because it reduces the likelihood of code injection attacks. So I'm going to say insert into table name, message, values, @message. And I'm going to add a parameter to that. Just, hello world. Cool. Insert the row. Great, it's in. Now we can rerun this with variation just by changing the parameters. So if I want to insert 9 more rows, then I'm just going to go ahead and I'll do it. Change the parameter for message value to one of these 3 random words and execute each non-query. Cool. Let's read our data back out a little bit differently. Remember, I said there was a little bit of an easier way to do this. So we're going to use a SQL data adapter to fill a data set. This is generally faster than a reader, at least for large tables, and less code. We can create our own SQL data adapter with a SQL command and a connection. So here I'm going to go select star from table name with our SQL connection we already have. And we're going to create a new data set to hold our results. And then we're going to fill the data set. And let's take a quick look at the data set. Now, by default, PowerShell will show you all the properties of an object that it does not have formatting for. This is handy, but most of the time when you're dealing with SQL, you're going to be getting one table back, and you can just go ahead and look at the first table in the data set. And there we are. Though it appears to have a few too many rows. By the way, we can also save that data set to an XML. And last but not least, we can clean up after ourselves by dropping the table. Create a command, drop the table, set our command text, run it, and we're done. All cleaned up, all done with demos. Hope that was fun. Okay, now that we're done with demo mode, as promised, it's story time. Long ago, I helped a competitor to Zillow. They build realtor websites for all the major brands, and their ETL is a DBA's nightmare. They have over 700 different data sources, and none of them are directly supported by SQL. Their intake had been taking days, and I do mean days, 3 to 4 days to update new listings. And this annoyed their customers, obviously. If your realtor website is several days out of date and Zillow has a more recent copy, this is not good for your realty business. So, had to kind of make it a little bit better. They had been trying to do it all with SQL views. This, in my opinion, was a bit of a mistake. It resulted in many a SLAM server, and many SLAM servers made them buy more servers, or rather rent more servers in a data center that was costing them about $30,000 a month. So they needed to stop being built on sticks and glue. They needed to figure out how to run in parallel, efficiently aggregate information, take the load off of SQL servers. And this is where we get to SQL and PowerShell for the win. How to fix it? Well, we use PowerShell to do the heavy lifting of querying and standardizing the data from RETs, IDX, and RESTful sources. Then we let the shape of the object dictate the intake. So rather than trying to spec out 700 different tables, we would create tables that match the shape of our input. And then we would standardize the shared information. We'd say, all right, here are the 50 different fields that we have. Let's map them all to this common set that you need for each of the customer scenarios. And we'd shard the storage by region rather than make one massive database or table to hold every listing, create lots of tables in each appropriate region to get all the listings. Then we figure out how to run in parallel. And that almost ends up being it. Just let the data describe itself, put it into SQL, give it a extracted form or transformed form of the view or data, and throw it into another table. Make sure you shard this table or this out into multiple tables and run it in parallel. How much better did this end up getting? Well, a purely SQL approach, again, was 3 to 4 days at 100% CPU in a $30,000 a month data center. SQL and PowerShell? Yes. I'll wait for a half second. Wouldn't be that much of the total runtime. You see, it was about 15 minutes at 10% CPU in 8 cloud workers with a total compute cost of less than $100 a month. I don't know about you, but I would call that a pretty big win. So, in my opinion, every DBA should learn PowerShell, and every PowerShell programmer should learn SQL. They complement each other very nicely. SQL can store and query much faster than PowerShell, and PowerShell is much more flexible than SQL. Using them together is the best of both worlds, and I hope this helps you understand that and see that. Thank you very much. Here's some doc links in case you needed it. You will keep coming back to that SQL connection, SQL data adapter class. I really could not get through any presentation about SQL and PowerShell without mentioning the wonderful DBA tools module, which you can find more information out of https dbatools.io. If you want to reach me on social media, I consider GitHub a bit of social media. You can get to github.com/startautomating. You can also reach me as Mr. PowerShell on Blue Sky. And don't forget to check out the new data-driven applications applied learning skill. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.